My name is Reed Marcus, and this is the story of a sacred ritual buried deep inside an old church where innocent lives were traded in the name of salvation. Elmridge, Oregon. A quiet town that looked like something out of a postcard. The kind of place where neighbors waved to each other, kids rode their bikes until sunset, and Sundays were spent in pews under soft stained glass light. But underneath that small town peace, something else lived. Something unspoken. Something old. They called it the Church of Eternal Light. It sat just off the highway, half hidden by trees and time. From the outside, it looked no different from any other church in the region. Modest. Quiet. Devout. But those who had lived in Elmridge long enough knew there were stories. Rumors that had survived through generations, passed in whispers and sideways glances. It started with a message. A handwritten letter sent by someone who had left Elmridge years ago. The paper was torn, the handwriting rushed. There was no return address. Just a single line underlined 3 times, "Don't believe what they serve on Good Friday." At first, it didn't make sense. But as the days passed, I began to dig. I wasn't new to stories like this. I had investigated cults before. I'd heard twisted sermons, seen the damage that belief, when bent and broken, could cause. But something about Elmridge felt different. Heavier. Quieter. Like everyone knew something but had learned to pretend they didn't. The more I looked, the more I found. Archived medical files. Newspaper clippings with strange gaps. Families that left town without a word. And a phrase that kept appearing, the Red Communion. It wasn't in any official documents. It wasn't in any sermons I could find. But it was there, in the margins, in coded notes, in fading journals. It didn't take long before I came across the name Pastor Gray. He was unlike other pastors I had seen. There were no recordings of his sermons. No social media. No public presence. Just a few grainy photographs and a list of real estate under his name that seemed far beyond what a small-town preacher should afford. I found references to him in old personal blogs, in forum posts from people who claimed to have once been part of the congregation. Some spoke of him as a holy man. Others, as something else entirely. They said he believed in purity, in cleansing the soul, that he preached about sin not just as a moral failure, but as a sickness. And like any sickness, he said, it needed to be cut out completely. He believed in something called the offering. No one would say what that was. Only that it happened once a year. Always on Good Friday. Always in secret. The deeper I went, the more disturbing the picture became. One former member, who only agreed to speak under anonymity, described a secret ritual known only to a chosen few within the church. They claimed that during this ritual, a special communion was prepared, not with wine and wafers, but with something far more sacred and far more sinister. They wouldn't say exactly what it was, only that it required a pure gift, something untouched, innocent, perfect. The way they spoke about it sent a chill down my spine. Reverent. Afraid. Regretful. There was no proof. No photos. No names. Just fragments of a terrible puzzle, and the same feeling in every account, that something unspeakable had been disguised as salvation. That inside that old wooden church, faith had been turned into something else. Something darker. I knew I had to get closer. So I moved to Elmridge. I used a different name, posed as a writer looking for peace and purpose. I rented a small room above the diner, attended services, shook hands, sang hymns. The congregation welcomed me without question. Smiles. Warmth. Kindness. But underneath it all, I could feel it, that silence. The kind that stretches behind practiced smiles and forced faith. By my 3rd week in town, I was sitting in the front row of the Church of Eternal Light, listening to Pastor Gray speak. His voice was calm, measured, hypnotic. He didn't raise it, didn't threaten, didn't accuse. But his words wrapped around the room like smoke. He spoke of sacrifice, of washing away pain, of unlocking blessings through obedience. And near the end, he said something that stayed with me. There is no redemption without offering, and no offering without cost. The room was silent when he said it. Not out of confusion, but out of knowing. They knew what it meant. And soon, I would too. I didn't come to Elmridge just to listen. I came to uncover the truth. And whatever the Red Communion was, I had just taken my first step into its shadows. It didn't take long for the smiles to feel rehearsed. At first, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. That maybe it was just the usual small-town charm with a few quirks. But the longer I stayed in Elmridge, the more I noticed how things didn't quite add up. People were kind, yes, but too kind. Conversations were brief, polite, and hollow, like everyone was speaking from a script. And any time I brought up Good Friday, the energy shifted. Smiles tightened. Eyes darted. Words changed. One night, after a Wednesday evening service, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Marlene. She was in her early 60s, wore lavender perfume, and had hands that trembled just slightly. I asked her casually what made Easter so special in Elmridge. Her smile faltered for just a second. Every church has its traditions, she said. We honor the cleansing. We reflect. We renew. I pressed gently. And the Red Communion. Her lips tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the pastor's office door across the hall. That's not something we speak about with outsiders, she said. You'll understand in time. Then she walked away. That was the first time I heard the phrase spoken out loud. The Red Communion. From then on, I started noticing small signs. Doors that were always locked. A room beneath the church that was never mentioned but clearly existed. A strange metallic smell that sometimes lingered in the hall after services. And every Friday morning, a delivery truck would arrive before dawn. Its back doors always sealed tight, its driver never seen entering the building. One night, I followed it. I waited across the street in my car with the headlights off. The driver, tall, hooded, unloaded several covered containers and rolled them through the back entrance. The process took less than 5 minutes. No words. No light. No sound except the faint clinking of metal. The next day, the church smelled like incense and iron. By mid-April, tension in town was rising. The closer we got to Good Friday, the more people withdrew. Stores closed early. Children were kept inside after dark. Conversations became shorter. There was a sense of anticipation, like something sacred and heavy was approaching. I received a note in my mailbox. It wasn't signed. Just a piece of paper folded once and written in ink that had bled slightly from moisture. The handwriting was neat, nervous. If you want to see the truth, come to the west basement door. Good Friday. Midnight. Do not speak. Do not be seen. That was all it said. It felt like a trap. Or a test. Either way, I couldn't ignore it. The days that followed moved slowly. The church held extra services. Gray's sermons became more intense, more symbolic. He spoke of obedience, of shedding the weight of sin, of becoming whole again. The congregation seemed transfixed, like his words touched something deeper than faith. The night of Good Friday arrived cold and cloudless. The streets were empty. Not a single porch light was on. I parked 2 blocks away and approached the church on foot, staying in the shadows. The west basement door was tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges. Old, rusted, almost invisible from the street. At 11:59 p.m., I slipped through the hedges and waited. 1 minute later, the door creaked open from the inside. No one was visible. No voice. Just an open door and a staircase that led downward into black. I stepped inside. It was cold and damp. The stairs creaked under my weight, but I moved slowly, trying not to breathe too loudly. At the bottom was a narrow corridor lit only by flickering candles in metal sconces. The walls were made of stone, lined with wood shelves and covered in dust. Ahead, I heard murmurs. Chanting. Soft. Rhythmic. I crept forward until I reached a small opening in the stone wall. Just wide enough to look through. Inside was a low-lit chamber. At the center stood a long wooden table draped in crimson cloth. Around it were members of the church dressed in white robes, their faces hidden by hoods. At the head of the table stood Pastor Gray, hands raised. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like reciting scripture. "The soul is reborn through offering," he said. "The spirit cleansed through submission. What we give, we do not lose, we multiply. What we offer, we do not grieve, we ascend." The others echoed the words. On the table was a covered silver tray and a goblet. I couldn't see what was inside. I didn't want to. As the chanting grew louder, the members began to form a circle around the table. Gray lifted the goblet and held it to the light. Its contents were thick, dark. He dipped his fingers into it and made a small mark on each forehead. One by one, the others drank. They whispered something afterward. A phrase I could barely make out, repeated in unison. Purity returns. Darkness lifted. Heaven sees. The atmosphere was reverent, joyful, even. But underneath it, I felt something primal. Something deeply wrong. This wasn't a reenactment or a symbolic ritual. They believed in what they were doing. Fully. Completely. I stayed until the candles burned low and the room began to empty. Then I crept back up the stairs, out through the hedges, and into the cold night. I didn't sleep. The next morning, the church hosted a sunrise service in the open field behind the building. Children played. Parents laughed. Plates of food were passed around freely. They called it a celebration of resurrection. A return to life. But I couldn't stop thinking about the tray on that table. The goblet. The silence of the ritual. I knew I hadn't seen everything. But I had seen enough to know this was no ordinary church. And that whatever they believed they were consuming, it wasn't just bread and wine. There was something darker behind the faith in Elmridge. And I was getting closer to it. After Good Friday, the town returned to normal as if nothing had happened. People went back to work. Shops reopened. Children played on sidewalks. But something about the town felt off, like a storm had passed, and everyone was pretending it hadn't touched them. I tried to keep my cover, attending Sunday services and pretending to blend in, but I felt watched. Not directly. Not by any one person. But the feeling was there, like my presence had been noticed, and the mask I wore was starting to slip. That week, I returned to the church basement during the day. The door was locked now, the hedges trimmed, and a new security camera mounted near the roofline. They were tightening access. Covering tracks. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Back in town, I began talking to people who had once belonged to the church but left. Most refused to speak. One man shut his door as soon as I mentioned the church's name. Another woman started crying quietly before telling me to never come back. But then I met someone who did talk. Her name was Elise. She had moved to Portland 5 years ago and only returned to Elmridge to care for her dying father. She agreed to meet me in a diner on the edge of town, under the condition that I didn't record her voice or use her real name. She looked tired, older than she should have. Her eyes had the same weight I'd seen in others who'd been through something they couldn't explain. She told me the truth, at least, the part she knew. There's a reason people stay silent, she said. It's not just fear. It's guilt. Elise had been raised in the church. Her parents were deeply involved, trusted by Pastor Gray. She had attended every service, every event, and even some of the private gatherings that only a few were invited to. But everything changed when her sister was born. Her name was June. She lived for only 6 days. And then she was gone. The story told to the town was that June passed peacefully in her sleep. A tragic, unexplained death. But Elise remembered things that didn't make sense. Late-night meetings. Her parents whispering about blessings and obedience. A white cloth that never came back from the church. Years later, Elise overheard something while hiding in the church library. A member telling Gray, "My wife is hesitant. She still thinks 7 days is too soon." Gray's reply chilled her, "That's when they're clean. Before the world stains them." That was the first time Elise realized something terrible had happened to her sister. She tried asking her parents. They denied everything. Grew angry. Told her not to question God's will. But the look in their eyes told her what they wouldn't say aloud. They believe it, she said. They truly believe that giving a child to the offering brings them closer to heaven. That it erases sin. That it opens doors. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. Elise said there were families in Elmridge who waited for Good Friday every year. Who prepared. Who prayed. And in some cases, who willingly offered their newborns for the ritual. They didn't see it as murder. They saw it as honor. And the church had perfected the cover-up. Records were altered. Death certificates quietly filed. Medical explanations provided when needed. The town helped keep it quiet. Because everyone, at least those in the inner circle, believed in the reward. Some parents do it for salvation, Elise said. Some for power. But all of them are promised something. She paused, looking down at her hands. My parents believed June was the price for my father's success. He got the position he prayed for. The money. The favor. But our family was never the same. She left Elmridge soon after. I thanked her, and she slipped out of the diner like she'd never been there. That night, I sat alone in my room, looking through old records I had copied from the town archive. I began noticing patterns. Children who died within the first week of birth. Always in March or April. Always in families connected to the church. Quiet funerals. No autopsies. They didn't all happen every year, but often enough to be a pattern. There was no way to prove it, not yet. But the belief was real. And belief like that, when left unchecked, can justify anything. The next morning, I received a call from a burner phone I'd left in my drawer for tips. A voice, distorted, afraid, spoke only one sentence before hanging up. They're planning another offering. This Friday. Someone you know is involved. That left me with 2 terrifying questions. Who was the next parent? And what would I do if I found them? I didn't sleep much after that call. The words echoed in my head. They're planning another offering. This Friday. Time was running out. I had just 4 days to figure out who the next child might be. 4 days to expose a practice that had remained hidden for decades. I started with the church bulletin. It was a small weekly pamphlet handed out after Sunday services. On the surface, it was innocent. Bible verses, community updates, upcoming weddings, and births. But this time, something caught my eye. A note near the bottom that read, "Blessings to the Andrews family, who welcomed baby Elias into the world on April 13th. That was 5 days ago. I didn't know the Andrews family well. I'd seen them at services, quiet, kind, the kind of people who always sat in the third row and left right after communion. They didn't stand out. That was what worried me most. I needed to be sure. So I started asking around, subtly, carefully. At the grocery store. Outside the post office. The same name kept coming up. People said the baby had been born healthy. A boy. No complications. But I noticed something else, too. Every time I mentioned the name Andrews, people paused. Just for a moment. Like they were choosing their words. Or hiding something. I decided to follow them. That night, I parked a few houses down from the Andrews home. Lights were on. Curtains drawn. A faint glow from the living room TV. Around midnight, I saw movement, someone walking from room to room, carrying a small bundle. Rocking gently. I watched until sunrise. Nothing unusual happened. But then came Thursday. In the early morning, I saw 2 men arrive at the house. They weren't dressed like social visitors. Suits. Clean cut. Too polished for Elmridge. They stayed for less than 20 minutes and left without speaking to anyone on the street. That afternoon, the blinds in the Andrews home were pulled tight. No one came or went. And Friday was approaching fast. I returned to the diner to meet with Elise again. She hadn't wanted to talk more, but I told her what I'd found. About the baby. About the 2 men. When I mentioned the date of birth, April 13th, her expression changed. They'll do it on the 7th day, she said. They always do. That would be Friday. She told me the ritual follows a strict belief system. The child must be no older than 7 days. Any later, and the offering is considered unclean. The timing is critical. And Gray is known for keeping to the rules, no matter the cost. They don't ask permission at the last minute, she added. If the Andrews agreed, they agreed months ago. Sometimes even before the child is born. That meant Elias was already marked. And unless I stopped them, that baby wouldn't see the sunrise on Saturday. I needed help. I contacted a friend in Portland, a journalist who had covered cult activity before. I gave her everything I had, names, dates, patterns, the tip about Elias. She promised to look into the Andrews hospital records, anything that could support the case. But she warned me it wouldn't be enough. We need proof, she said. Real, irrefutable proof. Or this will get buried like every other strange story from a small town. So I made a decision. I would go back into the church on Friday night. And this time, I would record everything. The plan was simple, at least in theory. I would sneak into the same basement chamber, hide in the same viewing space, and film the ritual. It was a risk. If I were caught, there was no telling what they'd do. But if I succeeded, I'd finally have the evidence I needed. That Friday felt like the longest day of my life. The streets were silent again. The church parking lot was empty by sunset, but I knew better now. The real ceremony didn't begin until midnight. I parked farther away this time. Wore all black. Brought a small pin camera I could clip to my jacket. At 11:45 p.m., I approached the church. No hedges now. No locked door. Just the heavy silence of a building preparing for something unspeakable. The door opened again, like before. No one visible. Just the void. I stepped inside. Down the stairs. Past the candlelit hall. Toward the chamber. This time, I wasn't just watching. I was filming. The chamber was exactly as I remembered. Stone walls, flickering light, the crimson-draped table. But this time, there was something else. A crib. Small. Wooden. Positioned next to the altar. Inside it, a baby. swaddled, sleeping. My stomach turned. The congregation filed in silently, dressed in the same white robes. Pastor Gray stood taller this time, firmer. He raised his hands, and the chanting began again. The soul is pure. The flesh is willing. The gate shall open. As the chants grew louder, Gray stepped forward and placed a hand over the crib. He murmured something I couldn't hear. Then he reached for the goblet. This was it. I held my breath, kept the camera steady, praying silently that no one would hear my heart pounding in my chest. Then a sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Behind me. I turned, and saw someone watching from the shadows. They didn't speak, just stared. And then, slowly, they closed the door behind them. I was trapped. I didn't move. The door shut with a quiet click, the kind of sound that seals more than just wood and metal, it seals fate. The figure who closed it stepped into the candlelight, and for a moment, I thought I was done. But they didn't grab me, didn't raise an alarm. They just pressed a finger to their lips. It was Elise. She whispered, "Stay hidden. Don't stop recording." And then she turned and disappeared into the congregation, dressed in white. I didn't have time to process what that meant. My camera was still rolling. I turned back to the altar. Gray had lifted the baby from the crib. The congregation chanted louder now, swaying as though in a trance. And then something even stranger happened. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her hands were trembling. Her eyes were red from crying, but she walked with purpose. This was the mother. She had offered the child. Gray took her hand and raised it to the ceiling. "In the name of obedience, in the name of redemption, do you relinquish?" The woman didn't speak, just nodded. And then, I looked away. I couldn't watch. I couldn't stomach it. But the sound, that soft, final sound, was enough to haunt me for the rest of my life. There was no scream, no cries, just the silence of something unnatural being accepted as holy. Gray placed something into the goblet, stirred it with a carved wooden rod, poured wine, blessed it. The congregation stepped forward, one by one. Communion. They drank from the goblet, heads bowed, every face calm, every gesture reverent. They believed this was holy. They believed this was salvation. I had what I needed. The footage was real, clear, unmistakable. I just had to get out. I crept back down the hallway, retracing my steps, avoiding every creaking board. But just before I reached the exit, a hand grabbed my arm. It was Elise again. "They'll come for you," she said, voice low, urgent. "Once they realize you were here, they'll never stop." I asked her why she helped me. "My sister never got justice," she said. "Maybe this child will." She gave me a flash drive. "Backup copy," she added, "in case you don't make it." Then she turned and walked away, vanishing down the corridor like a ghost who had said all she needed to say. I drove straight through the night, adrenaline replacing sleep. I made it to Portland by morning, handed the footage to my journalist friend, and explained everything. We didn't go to the local police. We went higher. Federal. Within 48 hours, the investigation began. They raided the church the next week. The basement was cleared out by then, altars gone, candles extinguished, carpets clean. But the records, the robes, the hidden files in the pastor's office, they were real. And damning. Multiple arrests were made. Pastor Gray vanished. Some say he fled the country. Others say he was protected by those higher up, believers in powerful places. His face was never seen again. The Andrews family refused to speak. The mother checked herself into psychiatric care. The father moved out of state under a new name. Elise disappeared. I never saw her again. But the story spread. Headlines, documentaries, endless debate about what was true, what was exaggerated, and what had been silenced for decades. The term blood communion became a symbol, a phrase whispered in corners of the internet. A conspiracy for some, a horrific truth for others. But I knew it was real. Because I was there. Because I saw the child. Because I still have nightmares about the look in that mother's eyes. The way love and fear and blind faith can twist together into something monstrous. I wish I could say that exposing it was enough. That the story brought peace. But cults like this don't die easily. They survive in shadows. In silence. In the hearts of people who believe that sin can be washed away by spilling someone else's blood. And every year, when Good Friday comes, I wonder, where is Grey now? Has another church taken root? And how many more parents are still out there, waiting to offer their child to the altar? Months passed after the raid. The town of Elmridge went quiet. The church was boarded up, the lot overgrown with weeds. A for sale sign appeared on the lawn, but no one ever came to view the property. Word had spread, no one wanted to touch that building, not even for demolition. It was as if the town itself wanted to forget. But forgetting wasn't easy. The media cycle died down eventually, replaced by newer scandals and more digestible tragedies. The footage I recorded circulated on private channels, blacked out and blurred, still too disturbing for the public eye. Even without the visuals, the descriptions were enough to make listeners turn off the broadcast mid-sentence. Investigators pieced together fragments of the cult's history. Records showed at least 24 infant deaths over a 30-year span, each officially listed as crib death, SIDS, or natural causes. Most parents refused to talk. Some defended the church. Others left town overnight. And the deeper they looked, the more disturbing it got. Financial records revealed donations from several prominent business figures, people with no obvious connection to Elmridge. Anonymous wires. Offshore accounts. Private jets logged landing in nearby fields around Good Friday every few years. The implication was clear, this wasn't just a rural secret. It was part of something much bigger. Elise's flash drive helped. It contained photos, letters, a ledger naming the families who had participated in offerings. Some were crossed out. Others had stars beside their names. We never learned what the stars meant. A few arrests stuck. Low-level enforcers, deacons, even a nurse at the local clinic, suspected of falsifying death certificates. But Grey remained a ghost. Some say he was seen in Romania. Others whispered about South America. There were even rumors of a private island where the faithful had gathered to start again. But those were just whispers. I stopped chasing him. The weight of it all nearly broke me. I started losing sleep. Started checking my locks twice, then 3 times each night. I saw faces in crowds that weren't there. I felt eyes on me in every airport. Even now, years later, I don't tell people where I live. There's one thing I've never admitted, until now. A year after the raid, I went back. To Elmridge. To the church. I told myself it was for closure. To see it one last time. To be sure it was truly dead. The building was still empty. Still boarded up. But someone had nailed a small wooden cross to the front door. Fresh. Recently painted. Tied around the cross was a white cloth. Like the ones they used in the ritual. And beneath it, carved into the wood, were 3 words. The work continues. I didn't stay. I got in my car and drove until the gaslight came on. I pulled over at a rest stop and cried for the first time in years. Not because I was scared, but because I realized something I hadn't let myself believe. We didn't stop it. We just slowed it down. This story doesn't have a clean ending. There was no courtroom victory. No final confrontation. No triumphant justice. Just the echo of chance in a stone basement. The memory of a sleeping child. And a question I'll never stop asking. How far will people go to wash away their sins? And how many more will suffer before someone says, enough?